This is Business Live from Sky News Centre, and these are the top stories this afternoon. The biggest hike in defence spending since the Cold War, funded by cuts in the foreign aid budgets. As Tesla sales drop by nearly a half in Europe, could Elon Musk be facing a consumer backlash for his political views? Plus, 3 years into the war in Ukraine, the product Europe has become more dependent on from Russia. Yeah, very good afternoon and welcome to Business Live on this Tuesday with me, Darren McCaffrey. Well, we're going to start with that developing story this afternoon, the increase in defence spending announced by the Prime Minister. It's the biggest hike since the Cold War. It'll see an increase from 2.3% of GDP to 2.5% by 2027, with the aim of reaching 3% in the next Parliament. It's still a lot lower, though, of course, than the 5% demanded of NATO allies by President Trump, who Sir Keir Starmer is due to, of course, see in the White House in the next couple of days. Well, let's speak to Edward Edburn. He is founder of the defence venture capital group MD1 and joins us this afternoon. First of all, Ed, your reaction to the Prime Minister's statements?
I think it's positive news for the country and for the sector. It's interesting, the amount, but I think the speed of the announcement is as interesting, as well as the future planned increases.
We're still talking about a significant increase, aren't we? But there are many people, even this afternoon, saying it's not enough. The government need to go further.
Yeah, I think it's we're in danger of treating this as an either-or. Now, while we're understandably focused on Ukraine and what is effectively a battlefield situation with battlefield technology, something we'd all know and recognise, I think it's worth noting the wider grey zone conflicts that have been going on for, well, effectively decades now, which are different types of technologies, different types of threats, and the need to have the ability to counter both of those threats at the same time.
Let's look about, or if we can, at the bigger pictures, if you don't mind, which is that many people, and I interviewed Pat McFadden from the Cabinet a little earlier, saying this also has to be part of an industrial strategy, that Britain needs to get this investment right, not just in its armed forces, but also in its defence industries too.
Absolutely. I mean, there needs to be a look at how we do procurement at the same time. I mean, the current picture is effectively defence primed, so our publicly listed defence companies who've always been a safe haven for investors, as defence has always maintained a fairly consistent level of spending within certain percentage points. At the same time, we're going to see a shift away from the kind of tanks, planes, all the sort of good heavy equipment, long 10-year programs for procurement, to technologies that are relevant today and need to be bought today, but equally may be out of date within 18 months' time and in need of renewal. So in a department that has an annualised budget, that's a very difficult thing to do, to keep up with emerging technologies and countering emerging threats at the pace of those threats.
Yeah, fascinating. As you were talking about tanks there, we were showing some tanks on screen, and as you say, that is in many ways a traditional form of fighting, but we've seen that on the battlefield in Ukraine, haven't we, in recent years. When you talk about future defence equipment, what are we talking about? Drones, clearly, for example. What potentially else would some of this money be spent on?
I think it's worth framing it as in, if we get to the battlefield, we're already slightly too late. Things have gone drastically wrong. We're looking very much at defence in its most traditional form, where in its preventative state. So that's going to be things like hardened cybersecurity, greater use of AI for decision making, and also processing capabilities on that side of things. Quantum is yet to play a large part, but largely will do. And these are technologies being driven by the private sector. And we're going to increasingly see a lot of private sector technologies moving into the defence space, who didn't necessarily intend to set themselves up as defence suppliers.
And Edward, I suppose what I've been trying to get my head around this afternoon is that we spent the last couple of years talking about how, and we are primarily talking about Russia, I think, when it comes to the threat, at least to the UK, has seen its defence capabilities massively degraded over the last 3 years. Is Russia capable of taking on the UK, taking on other European countries, given its current state?
I think it's capable of tying up a lot of our resources and a lot of our time and draining us of our treasure. I mean, when we set up ND1 as a fund, we were the first European Defence and National Security Fund at a time that was deeply unfashionable. This threat hadn't emerged. And while the militaristic threat of someone like Russia has always existed, really a lot of our eyes are on things like the threat from China and its access to our data and a lot of our civilian infrastructure and that side of things. So it's a very nuanced battlefield or picture that we look at the moment.
Okay, Edward, fascinating stuff, and clearly an issue we are going to be returning to a lot, not least of all with that meeting with Keir Starmer and President Trump a little later on this week. Thank you very much indeed. That's Edward Edburn there. Thank you. And just to let you know, we are going to be taking the Prime Minister's press conference on this live from Downing Street at 5 p.m. So within the next 30 minutes or so here on Sky News. Let's move on, though, because the Tesla owner, Elon Musk, has been a busy man in recent weeks, slashing federal spending in the US and using his X platform to try and influence politics in Europe. Is it then a surprise that Tesla sales have seen a big drop, particularly in Europe, as well as the growing competition from China? It appears that his political actions may have led to some people deciding they don't really want his cars. In January, Tesla sold 9,945 vehicles in Europe, and that's down 45% from the 18,161 sold last year. And according to the European Automobile Manufacturers Association, Tesla's share of the European market fell from 1.8% to 1%. Well, let's speak to Dan Ives, Global Head of Technology Research at Wedbush Securities. Dan, always a pleasure. First question, it's very clear, isn't it? Is there a connection?
Look, I mean, it's not pretty, right? I mean, in terms of Europe sales for Tesla, it's been a struggle for the last year, but I think about 10 to 15% of the decline is probably brand issues related to Musk. In terms of the Doge, Trump, I think some of the, sort of circus show a bit that we've seen, it's had a negative impact, I think, in Europe more than any other place, including the US.
In saying that, some people have also said Tesla effectively have dropped the ball a little bit, if you like, and that, frankly, the cars aren't quite as cutting edge as they were 5-10 years ago.
Yeah, I disagree with that. Look, I think when it comes to electric vehicles, Tesla continues to be the gold standard from a brand perspective. Look, Chinese players, BYD and others, I mean, they've had phenomenal vehicles. Competition continues to increase. But it comes down to you either want a Tesla or you don't. I think the issue is that you're starting to see much more of that anti-Musk sort of fever take place in Europe. And I think these numbers speak to it. But it's our view, autonomous is the future, and that continues to be much more positives from Trump administration despite some of the negatives here.
And just finally on this, Dan, you've been covering this sector for a long time. How much do you think kind of consumer thought process or sentiments about individuals or brands matters when it comes to what they buy? Or is it people just want a good product at a reasonable price and that's what really matters?
Look, I think usually that's what matters. I think Tesla's unique because when you buy a Tesla, it's synonymous with Musk. And it's part of, whether it's a modern day Albert Einstein or, and obviously others would strongly disagree, but you're buying the best engineering vehicle out there. You are, the brand of Musk is very associated with Tesla. And that's why what we've seen in terms of Doge, it's definitely had a negative impact, especially in Europe, and obviously throwing his hand in with the elections and a lot of the other issues in Germany, it's had a negative impact.
Well, let's talk about another big US company that seems to have got the Trump memo, if you like, and that is Apple, and unseen a massive $500 billion, $500 billion in the United States, creating tens of thousands of jobs. Is this purely because President Trump is back in the White House?
I mean, look, Cook and Trump, I mean, there's a strong relationship there. I mean, you go back to Trump 1, right? When Biden, Cook was really a background noise. But this 500 billion too. Look, it's a doubling down in terms of U.S. investments. We saw Stargate and others, but there's a little Hallmark card in there too, right? Like when the China tariffs come, make sure Apple, is not one that's impacted, right? So there's always Cook's 10% politician, 90% CEO.
Okay, and finally, let's talk about NVIDIA. We're getting their results tomorrow. It's fair to say it's been a pretty roller coaster ride, hasn't it, for tech shares over the last couple of months. And frankly, given how fragile and volatile the tech industry is, particularly with investment in AI, you'd have to say that volatility is only likely to continue.
Look, I mean, the godfather of AI, Jensen NVIDIA, that's what not just the street around the globe will be watching, but it's volatile, and Trump's added to that. But this AI revolution, I think, is just starting in terms of this, this $2 trillion AI capex. But it all starts with NVIDIA. When they talk, everyone listens. We expect great things tomorrow night. That should calm some nerves in what's a white knuckle period for tech stocks.
Okay, Dan, thank you very much indeed. And one day I will also have to find out where you buy your shirts from, because it is always a colourful, I think, contribution from you on this programme. Dan,
and we'll do that in a separate programme. Exactly.
Indeed. Thank you very much indeed, Dan House there. Now, 3 years on from the invasion of Ukraine, and Europe still remains dependent on Russian gas. And there is one more product that we also have come to rely on. That is Russian fertiliser. The UK has banned imports from Moscow, but the story is still very different elsewhere in Europe, as our economics and data editor, Ed Conway, explains.
How would you feel if I told you there was a critical ingredient that we're now more reliant on Russia for than we were before the invasion? When I say we, I mean Europe in general. Look at this, though, OK? Start with a bit of good news. This is wholesale gas prices. These, by the way, are not the prices we pay at home. The prices we pay at home are going up because of the price cap. But actually, the wholesale gas price has just started to come down quite a lot, 22% in the past fortnight. It might mean that bills might be more cheap in the future. But why is that happening? It's because people are looking at what's happening, thinking of potential peace talks and thinking that might push gas prices down because you've got more gas potentially going into Europe. And there hasn't been enough gas in Europe in recent months. And that's partly because there is not as much gas coming from Russia. This is showing you just the proportion of European gas, so EU gas coming from Russia. It used to be above 50%. It's come down an awful lot. Worth saying, if you include liquefied natural gas, it doesn't look like quite so much of a fall. But even so, less gas in Europe from Russia. And that's a bit of an issue, because if you look at all of the different kind of uses that gas plays in the economy in Europe, well, it's quite a lot of stuff, It's transport, but it's also residential. So all those homes, it's heating the homes, it's going into power stations, but also it's going into industry, OK? So it's getting the factories working, it's producing chemicals. And when it comes to chemicals, one of the most important chemicals is fertiliser. And most nitrogen fertiliser, is made from gas. It's a fossil fuel product. But because that gas is so expensive, not as much of it is being made in Europe, raising the question, where does it come from? Well, in the past, a lot of it came from Russia. And just look at what's happened with our European dependence on fertiliser from Russia. That has come down a bit, but whereas iron and steel is much lower than it was before, fertiliser, it's actually relatively high. And if we look not just at the share, but at the total amount, have a look at this chart, OK? So this is the total amount of nitrogen fertiliser, the most important type of fertiliser, coming from Russia, just in volume terms. And compare these two areas. So back 2018-19, best period to compare things to, because obviously that was the pandemic then. 2018-19, over that period, 4.6 million tonnes. Now look at the last 2 years, 4.9 million tonnes. So Europe is importing more fertiliser now from Russia than it was before the invasion. It's kind of striking, isn't it? And actually, if you look at where fertiliser, all types of fertiliser come from into Europe, it's pretty clear, isn't it? It's Russia. That was before the invasion. Now look, after the invasion, does anything change? Does the red bar change? Actually, the red bar goes up a bit. Really striking, isn't it? Worth saying, though, there is one country which doesn't have quite the same issue. It's the UK, because we banned the import of Russian and Belarusian fertiliser. So that's gone down basically to zero. And where's our fertiliser coming from? It's coming from the United States instead. But across Europe as a whole, that dependence on Russian fertiliser is actually going up, not down.
The Ed Conway there. Well, on a very different note, it must be said, Kensington Palace have tweeted out this picture, and that is, of course, Prince William meeting Thomas Tuchel, who is the new England manager, with the words, "Great to meet the new England manager, Thomas Tuchel, for the first time today and hear about plans for the team." Of course, Prince William is president of the Football Association, has been for some 20 years, and there he is welcoming the new England manager, Thomas Tuchel, with that picture today for the first time, and clearly hearing about plans that the manager has for the England team. OK, you're watching Business Live here on Sky News. Coming up in just a couple of minutes, we'll be looking at how the markets are doing on this Tuesday. The FTSE up just a fraction. All the details after this break. Stay tuned.
The town famous for a fake grooming scandal
I did not leave the house for about 3 years.
had a secret that until recently wasn't known.
Barrow got branded to be a lying town. It's not. Grooming was happening here.
There were other liars in this town with other secrets.
She is naming men who go on to be convicted of offences against other women and girls.
We're trying to see as much as we can.
We start with breaking news.
I am Anna Botting.
It's been quite some day.
The golden age of America begins right now.
A long-awaited ceasefire is now underway.
First question, Sky News.
Congratulations, this is a huge moment.
Describe these feelings, it's incredible.
Now to California.
The Democratic mayor of Los Angeles cut the fire department budget.
Do you owe citizens an apology? Have you nothing to say today?
Jane Secker, Sky News. Would you like to respond to us now?
I've never seen anything like this.
Beth Rigby, Sky News.
In principle, would you agree to do that?
Criticism of you, the president, is banned. How is this a fair election?
Historic day here today.
The cameras are poised here, there, everywhere, waiting to see what the president might do next.
I gave you the A+ treatment. Thank you. Thank you all.
Welcome to the world.
Our new podcast, starting now. It's very exciting. Every week, we'll be reporting from the world's trouble spots.
We get to hold those in positions of power accountable, and we get to ask the questions that the audience, the listeners, want to know about.
And that's why it is so important that people tune in, come along for the road, come along for the journey. It'll be fun.
I saw police being forceful, pushing young men and women to the ground as they made almost 100 arrests. Will the cold affect your voters?
Well, we have a lot of tremendous support.
Free, wherever you get your news.
The people here know that worse storms may well be on their way.
I'm Martha Kellner, and I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Los Angeles.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story.
I'm ready. Are you?
Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Weeknights on Sky News.
This is your chance. Tell people. Welcome to the Politics Hub.
Our police force has apologised.
If you want to find out about Grimsby, you come to the docks. I'm live in Jerusalem.
Are you not concerned that that could lead to all-out war?
Hello there, good evening. There are fears of an upsurge in violence. What's at stake here?
You are watching the press preview, a first look at the front pages as they arrive.
You want to talk business? Meet me in the On Board Lounge.
Sky News. Fly better. Thank you.
Just bringing you some breaking news coming into us at Sky Centre in the last couple of minutes. This comes from the US Defence Secretary, Pete Hegseth, who has tweeted out that he has just gotten off the phone to John Healey, of course, our Defence Secretary, saying that John Healey had confirmed that the UK will increase defence spending to 2.5% of GDP and eventually much further. This is in the tweet, and then goes on to say a strong step from an enduring partner. So that from Pete Hegseth, saying that he's just spoken to John Healey, clearly welcoming the increase in defence spending and saying that it is a strong step from an enduring partner. This all ahead of a meeting between the Prime Minister and President Trump a little later on this week in the White House. And just a reminder, we are also expecting to hear from the Prime Minister in a press conference in the next 10 minutes, and we'll have that for you here on Sky News. Well, let's get more, particularly on this idea about defence spending. Let's bring in George Lagarius. He is Chief Economist at Mazars. George, very good afternoon to you. First of all, what's the market reaction been to effectively this announcement today? Because it's not just the UK. We know the Germans have been talking about a large increase in defence spending in the last couple of days too.
So the market reaction in equities has been very positive. European, which include the UK, defense stocks are up nearly 22% year to date. And this is the next big theme, a lot of fiscal spending on the side of defense. And, you know, this was not on the board until very late last year. It's come now on the board, and it's something that the markets are looking very closely at.
And is it mainly the defence industry, if we're honest about this, that are gaining on this? Because clearly, if we're talking about the spending increases, as I say, not just here, but across Europe, you know, defence manufacturers are going to be pretty busy over the next couple of years, the next decades.
Overall, manufacturing should benefit somewhat. Infrastructure should benefit somewhat. A lot of that spending that can be labeled as defense spending can be more general infrastructure spending. You know, it's a little bit of accounting here and there. So the point is that fiscally, this is good. The governments are opening their wallets, and this probably will be good for the whole economy as well.
George, let's talk about the US economy if we can. We've been very used to it being extraordinarily robust in the last pretty much decade or so. And yet there are signs, negative signs, aren't there, around things like consumer confidence that suggest that actually things might be turning.
So there is evidence, I wouldn't call it a demand shock yet because that's too heavy a word, but there is evidence of something happening with demand. We saw it in previous retail sales. We saw it in the two consumer confidence indices, University of Michigan and Conference Board. We saw it in the Chicago Fed National Activity Index, and they all point to way more reticent consumers. Consumers are afraid of tariffs, they're afraid of inflation, and ultimately they're more afraid of what this is going to do to their finances.
And do you think that might lead, probably too early to tell, but it's always good to speculate, isn't it? It might lead Donald Trump to maybe rethink about certain things, maybe even tariffs themselves.
I think tariffs are so core to his strategy that he would really have to see a significant pullback in demand. You know, something like a recession before he would double back on this. So no, I don't think immediately this will change. The narrative will change. Somebody will be blamed for it, but I don't think that there is a big probability that this will cause him to reverse course.
OK, George, as always, a pleasure. Thank you very much indeed. George Lagarius there joining us this afternoon. That is it from me on Business Live, of course, for today. We're back tomorrow morning, as we always are, at 11:30. Up next, though, it is the News Hour with Kamali and, not least of all, Keir Starmer giving that press conference live from Downing Street at a time in which he has announced that defence spending will increase to 2.5% by 2027, though it does mean a cut in foreign aid. So the Prime Minister facing questions from journalists in a pretty significant day, I would say, for the Labour government. That is up next here on Sky News. Have a good evening, and I'll see you tomorrow. Goodbye.